The Alpha King expected tears. The nobles expected tears. The woman standing beside him, the one he had just publicly chosen, expected tears. Instead, Arwen Holloway smiled. A real smile. Not the trembling smile of someone trying not to cry. Not the proud smile of someone hiding humiliation. A peaceful smile. The kind people wear when they finally put down something heavy. The midwinter assembly fell strangely quiet. Because everyone felt it. Something was wrong. Alpha King Redian Voss stood at the center of the Grand Hall beside Lady Celeste Thornfield. Moments earlier, he had announced before the entire kingdom that he intended to court her. The declaration should have been celebrated. Instead, hundreds of eyes drifted toward one woman, Arwen. For 3 years, the kingdom had already decided who belonged beside the throne. Not because Rydian promised anything, because people assumed. They saw Arwen accompanying him on diplomatic tours, standing beside him during council functions, representing royal interests across multiple territories. Over time, assumption became certainty. The kingdom wrote a future that never officially existed. And now Rydian had erased it with a single announcement. The reaction everyone expected never came. No tears, no outrage, no public humiliation, just that smile. Celeste noticed it first. The slight confusion crossing her face appeared almost immediately, because she had prepared herself for competition, for heartbreak, for resentment. Instead, Arwen looked relieved. The realization unsettled her. It unsettled everyone, especially Rydian, because victory should not feel uncomfortable, yet somehow it did. As congratulations began pouring in, Rydian found himself looking toward Arwen again, and again and again. Each time he expected the smile to disappear, expected reality to catch up, expected grief to arrive. It never did. Arwen accepted congratulations from several nobles, spoke politely with guests, even approached Celeste personally. "I wish you both happiness." The sincerity in her voice felt impossible. Then she smiled once more, the same peaceful smile. The same smile Rydian couldn't understand. For reasons he couldn't explain, it bothered him. Not because she seemed angry, because she didn't. Not because she appeared heartbroken, because she wasn't. The absence of pain felt far stranger than pain itself. Several hours later, Arwen quietly left the celebration. No dramatic farewell, no final confrontation, no scene. She simply disappeared into the crowd, and as the doors closed behind her, Radian experienced a strange sensation. Not relief, not satisfaction. Something else, something uncomfortable. Because for the first time all evening, a question entered his mind, and once it arrived, it refused to leave. Why did she look free? The celebration continued. Music returned, wine flowed. Nobles crowded around Rydian and Celeste offering congratulations. Everything should have felt perfect. Instead, Rydian kept looking toward the door, the same door Arwen had quietly disappeared through. It made no sense. He had made his choice. The kingdom approved, the court approved. Even Celeste seemed pleased. Yet something about Arwen's reaction lingered, or rather, the lack of a reaction. Most people expect pain after rejection, embarrassment, disappointment, something. Arwen offered none of it, only peace. The memory followed him throughout the evening, then throughout the next morning, then the next. 3 days later, Rydian finally forced himself to stop thinking about it. Unfortunately, that was the exact moment he received his first surprise. "Your Majesty." A council secretary approached his desk carrying several documents. "What is it?" The woman hesitated. "Lady Arwen has submitted her resignations." Rydian frowned. Resignations? From the Royal Cultural Committee. The answer surprised him. Arwen had spent years helping manage that initiative. It was practically hers. "Anything else?" The secretary glanced down. "The Historical Preservation Network." Rydian's expression tightened. That was unusual. Very unusual. Then came the final document. And the Royal Community Alliance. Silence. Because that one made no sense. The Royal Community Alliance had been Arwen's creation. She spent years building relationships across the kingdom, traveling, negotiating, organizing support systems between territories. The project existed because she built it. "Why leave now?" The secretary shifted uncomfortably. "There are additional withdrawal notices expected this week." Rydian stared at the paperwork. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Not concern, not yet. Confusion. Because suddenly the smile from the assembly made less sense. A heartbroken woman might withdraw emotionally. A humiliated woman might disappear temporarily. Arwen was doing neither. She wasn't hiding. She was untangling herself. Piece by piece. Thread by thread. Removing herself from every corner of his world. The realization followed him throughout the week. Then another surprise arrived. Several departments began reporting delays. Nothing catastrophic, just unusual. A dispute between two merchants remained unresolved. A regional initiative lacked coordination. A diplomatic response arrived later than expected. Small things. Yet they all pointed toward the same missing person, Arwen. For years, Rydian never paid attention to how often her name appeared in solutions. Now her absence kept appearing in problems. The pattern became increasingly difficult to ignore. Then one evening, while crossing the Western Council wing, Rydian overheard two councilwomen speaking. Their voices drifted through an open doorway. Did you hear? Hear what? Lady Arwen received an offer from the Western Alliance. Rydian stopped walking, immediately. The Western Alliance. One of the most powerful independent territories in the region. The second woman sounded surprised. She's considering it? Apparently. A pause. Then, I heard she may leave before winter ends. Silence settled over the corridor, because suddenly the resignations made sense, the withdrawals, the unfinished projects, the distance. Arwen wasn't stepping back. She was preparing to leave, possibly forever. And for reasons Rydian couldn't explain, that possibility bothered him far more than it should have. At first, Rydian told himself it didn't matter. People left the capital all the time. Nobles relocated. Officials accepted foreign appointments. Diplomats traveled between territories. The Western Alliance was a prestigious opportunity. Arwen would be foolish to refuse it. That should have been the end of the discussion. Instead, he kept thinking about it. The thought appeared during meetings, during meals, even during conversations with Celeste. Every time it surfaced, Rydian asked himself the same question. Why does this bother me? The answer never came. A week later, he received another resignation notice, then another, then another. By the end of the month, Arwen had stepped away from nearly every royal responsibility that connected her to the throne. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly, efficiently, as though she had been planning the transition for much longer than anyone realized. The unsettling part wasn't that she was leaving. It was how prepared she seemed. No hesitation, no uncertainty, no signs of second thoughts. The woman who spent 3 years standing beside the throne now behaved like someone already living somewhere else. One afternoon, Rydian spotted her crossing the palace courtyard. Normally, Arwen moved with purpose. Today was no different. Except now he noticed details he previously ignored. Officials stopped to greet her. Servants smiled when she passed. A group of visiting merchants thanked her for something before continuing on their way. The interactions seemed small, ordinary, yet there were so many of them. Too many, almost as though the entire kingdom knew Arwen better than he did. The realization irritated him, for reasons he couldn't explain. Later that evening, Rydian attended a planning session for the upcoming winter relief programs. The meeting quickly became frustrating. Questions remained unanswered. Reports were incomplete. Several organizers seemed uncertain about next steps. Finally, one exhausted administrator sighed. Lady Arwen usually handled this. The room fell silent. The comment wasn't criticism, it was fact. And somehow that made it worse. Because nobody argued. Nobody corrected him. Everyone simply nodded, as though the statement explained everything. The meeting ended shortly afterward, but the discomfort remained. By now, Rydian noticed a pattern. Whenever something worked smoothly, Arwen's name appeared somewhere behind it. Whenever something struggled, people mentioned her absence. The connection became impossible to ignore. Then came the report, the one that changed everything. The following morning, his senior advisor entered the royal study, carrying a thick stack of records. The man looked unusually serious. Your Majesty. Rydian glanced up. What is it? The advisor placed the documents on the desk. You asked why so many departments are struggling. I did. The older man nodded, then gently pushed the records forward. You should see this. Rydian frowned. The stack looked enormous. Years of reports, projects, correspondence, crisis resolutions. What exactly am I looking for? The advisor hesitated, then answered quietly, the things Lady Arwen did while everyone else was busy looking at the throne. The statement lingered in the room, heavy, uncomfortable. And for the first time since the Midwinter Assembly, Rydian felt something that looked suspiciously like concern. Because suddenly he wasn't wondering why Arwen was leaving. He was beginning to wonder how much of the kingdom would leave with her. The report should have taken an hour to review. Instead, Rydian spent the entire day reading it, and the longer he read, the worse he felt. The first section covered diplomatic disputes, minor conflicts between territories, trade disagreements, border misunderstandings, the sort of problems that rarely reach the throne because someone resolved them first. Again and again, the same name appeared, Arwen Holloway, sometimes directly, more often hidden in the details. A recommendation here, a negotiation there, a compromise proposed before tensions escalated. Invisible work, the kind people only notice when it stops happening. The next section proved even more unsettling. Community programs, disaster relief initiatives, educational partnerships, regional development projects. Entire networks existed because Arwen spent years building relationships nobody else considered important. Rydian stared at page after page. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Arwen's influence touched nearly every corner of the kingdom, not because she held official power, because people trusted her. And trust, he was beginning to realize, was often more valuable. Hours passed. The stack of documents grew smaller. His discomfort grew larger. Finally, he reached the oldest records. Projects from 3 years earlier, the beginning. The period when Arwen first started appearing beside him regularly. One report caught his attention. A diplomatic crisis involving 3 territories. Rydian remembered it clearly. The situation nearly collapsed. Then, somehow, everything worked out. At the time, he assumed his advisors deserved the credit. Now he looked closer. Buried near the bottom of the report sat a single note. Resolution framework proposed by Lady Arwen Holloway. Silence filled the study, because suddenly a memory surfaced. The night before that negotiation. Arwen mentioning an idea over dinner. Rydian barely listening. Then taking the solution into a meeting the next morning. The realization landed hard. Not because he stole credit, because he never bothered asking where the solution came from. The deeper he searched, the more examples appeared. Ideas, strategies, connections, contributions. Always present. Rarely acknowledged, not because anyone intentionally ignored her, because Arwen never demanded recognition. And everyone eventually became accustomed to that, including him. Especially him. As evening settled outside the palace windows, Rydian finally pushed the final report aside. Exhaustion settled heavily across his shoulders. The advisor who delivered the documents remained nearby, quietly waiting. Eventually, Rydian spoke. Why didn't anyone tell me? The older man looked genuinely surprised. Tell you what? How much she was doing. The advisor's expression softened. Then he gave an answer Rydian wasn't prepared to hear. We assumed you knew. Silence. Because that was the problem. Everyone assumed. The kingdom assumed Arwen would become queen. The court assumed Rydian understood her value. Arwen assumed waiting would eventually produce an answer. Assumptions. Everywhere. And now those assumptions were collapsing. One by one. The advisor gathered several empty folders, then paused at the door. There's one more thing. Rydian looked up. The older man hesitated, almost reluctant. What? The answer came quietly. Lady Arwen leaves for the Western Alliance in 12 days. The study suddenly felt much colder. 12 days. Not months, not someday. 12 days for the first time, the reality felt immediate, real, final. And before he could stop himself, Rydian asked the question that had been growing inside him for weeks. Where is she now? Because suddenly 12 days felt far too short. Rydian found Arwen 3 days later, not at the palace, not at a royal function, not attending one of the countless farewell gatherings being organized in her honor. He found her at the Eastern Trade Grounds, standing among crates, wagons, and stacks of documents. Workers moved around her carrying supplies. Officials checked inventories. Messengers came and went. The entire place buzzed with activity, and somehow in the middle of all that chaos, Arwen looked perfectly at ease. Happy, even. That realization bothered him immediately. Because she should not have looked this free. At least, part of him thought so. Not after leaving everything behind. Not after walking away from a future everyone assumed she wanted. Yet there she was, smiling. Laughing with a merchant. Reviewing maps with a transport coordinator. Moving through the crowd with a lightness he had never noticed before. Or perhaps it had never existed before. Eventually, Arwen spotted him. The workers around her immediately straightened. Several bowed. Conversations quieted. The Alpha King had a way of changing the atmosphere simply by arriving. Arwen merely smiled. The same smile. The one that had haunted him for over a month. Your Majesty. The greeting felt polite, professional. Nothing more. For reasons he didn't like, that disappointed him. You seem busy. Her smile widened slightly. I am. The answer should have ended the conversation. Instead, Rydian remained standing there, watching her, trying to understand something that refused to make sense. Finally, Arwen tilted her head. Was there something you needed? The question forced him to confront the truth. He hadn't come here for official business. He hadn't come to discuss the Western Alliance. He hadn't even come to ask about her departure. He came because of one question. One impossible question that refused to leave him alone. For weeks, it followed him everywhere, at meetings, at dinners, even in his dreams, and now, standing before her, he finally asked it. Why did you smile? Arwen blinked, clearly surprised, the day of the assembly. Understanding immediately crossed her face. For a brief moment, she looked away, toward the distant hills beyond the trade grounds. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed softly, not mockingly, not bitterly, almost sadly. The sound unsettled him, because it carried years of understanding he somehow lacked. When she finally looked back at him, her eyes seemed gentler. I've been wondering when you'd ask, Rydian frowned. You knew I would? Eventually. The answer only frustrated him more. Arwen folded her hands, then spoke quietly, because I finally had an answer. Silence. The response made no sense. An answer to what? For several seconds, she didn't reply. The breeze moved through the trade grounds. Workers continued loading wagons in the distance. Life continued around them. Then Arwen spoke. For years, I kept asking myself the same question. Her voice remained calm, steady. I wondered if I was waiting for something that would never happen. Rydian felt his chest tighten. The words landed harder than expected, because suddenly he understood. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Enough to realize the smile wasn't relief at losing him. It was relief at finally knowing, and somehow that truth hurt far more than heartbreak ever could. The trade grounds suddenly felt much quieter. Not because the workers had stopped. Not because the wagons had ceased moving. Because Rydian could hear nothing except Arwen's words. I wondered if I was waiting for something that would never happen. The sentence lingered between them, heavy, unavoidable. For years, he had never considered that possibility. Not really, because Arwen was always there, reliable, patient, steady. Like a lighthouse standing against a storm. People rarely worry about losing things they believe are permanent. That had been his mistake. One of many, apparently. Rydian folded his arms, trying to ignore the uncomfortable pressure growing inside his chest. And the assembly gave you your answer? Arwen nodded. Yes, the simplicity bothered him. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just certainty. The very thing she apparently spent years lacking. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rydian asked the question before he could stop himself. Were you disappointed? Arwen looked genuinely surprised. The reaction alone told him he had misunderstood something. A little. The honesty startled him, because she didn't pretend otherwise, didn't claim she never cared, didn't rewrite history. She simply told the truth. I cared about you, Rydian. The use of his name caught him off guard. Not your majesty, not formal distance, just honesty. For the first time in weeks, he couldn't look away. Arwen continued, I cared for a very long time. The admission carried no bitterness, only exhaustion, the kind that arrives after years of carrying hope by yourself. Then she smiled again. Smaller this time, sadder. But caring and waiting aren't the same thing. The statement hit harder than expected, because suddenly he understood what she meant. Arwen hadn't been waiting for him to choose her. She had been waiting for certainty, for clarity, for an answer, any answer. And the Midwinter Assembly finally gave her one. Not the answer she hoped for, but an answer nonetheless. The realization settled heavily between them. After a long silence, Rydian spoke. Make it sound simple. A soft laugh escaped her. It wasn't. For the first time, genuine vulnerability appeared in her eyes. It took years. The words carried more weight than anything else she had said. Years, not weeks, not months, years, while he focused on ruling a kingdom, while he assumed there would always be time, while he believed some things would simply remain unchanged. Arwen had been quietly reaching the limits of her patience, and he never noticed, because he never looked. The truth stung, far more than he expected. Eventually, Arwen glanced toward the workers loading supplies onto the final group of wagons. The Western Alliance leaves in 6 days. 6 days. The number landed like a warning. Not much time, not enough time. The realization unsettled him immediately, because suddenly the future felt smaller, narrower, as though opportunities were quietly disappearing one by one. Arwen followed his gaze, then smiled, the same peaceful smile from the assembly. Only now he finally understood it. It wasn't happiness, it wasn't victory, it wasn't indifference, it was freedom. And standing there among wagons preparing to carry her away, Rydian realized something terrifying. The woman he had spent years taking for granted was no longer waiting for him to notice her. She had already started walking away. The closer Arwen came to leaving, the harder the kingdom made it. Not intentionally, quite the opposite. People simply refused to let her disappear quietly. Every day brought another farewell gathering, another invitation, another request for one last meeting. At first, Rydian assumed it was simple politeness. Then he started paying attention, really paying attention, and what he saw unsettled him. Village leaders traveled for days just to thank her. Merchants delivered gifts she repeatedly tried to refuse. Teachers sent letters describing schools she helped fund. Community organizers spoke about programs she created years ago. Everywhere he looked, people seemed to have a story, a memory, a reason to be grateful. The strangest part? Most of those people expected nothing in return. They weren't praising her because she stood near the throne. They praised her because Arwen had helped them personally, quietly, without publicity, without recognition. One afternoon, Rydian attended a regional planning meeting. The gathering should have been routine. Instead, it became another uncomfortable lesson. A village elder spotted him entering the chamber. Your Majesty. The man bowed respectfully, then smiled. Please thank Lady Arwen for us before she leaves. Rydian hesitated. For what? The elder looked surprised by the question. Ashy Valley. Silence. The name meant nothing to him. The elder continued. The floods 6 years ago. Still nothing. The man laughed softly. We would have lost half the valley if she hadn't organized emergency supplies. The room grew quiet, because suddenly other people started speaking. She helped our trade routes. She resolved the river dispute. She found funding for our medical clinic. Story after story followed, one after another. Relentless. Each account painted the same picture. A woman who showed up when needed. A woman who solved problems. A woman people trusted. Rydian sat through the rest of the meeting in silence, because a realization had begun forming, an uncomfortable one. For years, he assumed people respected Arwen because she worked alongside the throne. The truth appeared far more complicated. People respected Arwen because she earned it. The throne was merely nearby. The distinction mattered a great deal. Unfortunately, the lessons didn't stop there. Meanwhile, Celeste struggled. At first, Rydian ignored the signs. Missed appointments, delayed responses, forgotten commitments. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough to create friction. Enough to notice, more importantly, enough to compare. The comparison happened automatically. Every missed detail reminded him of someone who never missed them. Every unfinished responsibility reminded him of someone who quietly completed them. The pattern became impossible to escape, and once he noticed it, he saw it everywhere. The realization followed him throughout the week. Then Arwen's final day arrived. The capital woke before sunrise. Crowds gathered along the main avenue. Merchants closed shops temporarily. Officials postponed meetings. Even people who barely knew her appeared to say goodbye. Ridian stood at the palace balcony watching the growing crowd below. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Because the scene looked wrong, not like a farewell, like a loss. And for the first time, he wondered whether the kingdom wasn't the only thing about to lose something valuable. The entire capital seemed to gather for Arwen's departure. The main avenue overflowed with people. Merchants, village leaders, diplomats, teachers, families, workers, thousands lined the streets. Not because a royal procession was leaving, because Arwen was. That fact alone unsettled Rydian. For years, he had measured influence through titles, authority, position. Yet standing above the crowd, he was witnessing something entirely different: respect. The kind that couldn't be commanded, the kind that had to be earned. And Arwen had earned it, one person at a time, one act at a time, 1 year at a time. By mid-morning, her carriage stood ready near the western gate. Wagons filled with supplies waited nearby. Officials from the Western Alliance reviewed final travel documents. Everything was prepared. Everything was moving forward, with or without him. That realization finally forced Rydian into motion. Before he could change his mind, he descended the palace steps and crossed the crowded avenue. The people parted automatically. Whispers followed him, curious, hopeful, nervous, because everyone sensed the importance of the moment. Arwen stood beside her carriage, speaking with a group of children. When she noticed him approaching, she smiled politely. The same smile, always the same smile, yet now he understood it better, which somehow made it harder to see. The children hurried away. The crowd gradually fell silent, waiting, watching. For several seconds, neither spoke. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Rydian broke the silence. "I've been trying to understand something." Arwen tilted her head slightly. "What?" His throat felt unexpectedly tight. The words should have been easy. Instead, they felt heavier than any speech he had ever delivered before the kingdom. Because this wasn't politics. This wasn't diplomacy. This was truth. And truth often arrived too late. Slowly, he met her eyes. "I think I made a mistake." The words echoed through the silence. Gasps rippled through parts of the crowd. Others simply stared. Arwen remained perfectly still. No triumph appeared on her face. No satisfaction. No revenge. Nothing. Only understanding. And somehow that hurt most of all. Because she wasn't waiting for this confession. She had already moved beyond it. After a long moment, she nodded. "Maybe you did." The honesty struck him harder than anger would have, because there was no cruelty in it. No punishment, just reality. Rydian swallowed. The weight of everything he had learned over the past weeks settled heavily on his shoulders. The reports, the projects, the people, the years. All the things he failed to notice. All the things he assumed would remain. Then he asked the question he already feared. "Is there anything I can say to change your mind?" Silence followed, long, gentle, final. Arwen looked toward the western road stretching beyond the city walls, toward her future, then back at him. And the answer appeared in her eyes before she ever spoke. No. The realization hit immediately, because some opportunities disappear gradually, until one day you discover they are already gone. And standing beside that carriage, Rydian finally understood something devastating. He had not arrived too late. He had been late for years. The silence between them lasted only a few seconds, yet to Rydian it felt much longer. Long enough to understand what Arwen wasn't saying, long enough to recognize that some doors close quietly, without arguments, without dramatic goodbyes, without anyone realizing they were shutting until it was too late. Around them, the capital waited. Thousands of people watched. But strangely, the crowd no longer mattered. Neither did the palace, or the throne, or the expectations that had shaped the last 3 years. Only the truth remained, and the truth was painfully simple. Arwen was leaving. not because she hated him, not because she wanted revenge, not because she hoped he would suffer. She was leaving because she had finally stopped waiting. The realization settled heavily inside him. For years, Rydian had viewed rejection as an ending, a moment, a decision, one person choosing a path while another accepted disappointment. Now he understood something different. Sometimes rejection doesn't end a story, sometimes it releases someone from it. Arwen looked toward the gathered crowd. Many people smiled through tears, others waved, children called her name. The affection surrounding her felt genuine, earned, real. Rydian suddenly understood why the farewell seemed so large. People weren't saying goodbye to someone connected to the throne. They were saying goodbye to someone who had mattered in their lives. Someone who showed up, someone who listened, someone who helped. The kingdom had not gathered because Arwen was important to the crown. The kingdom had gathered because Arwen was important to them. That distinction would stay with him forever. A soft breeze moved through the avenue. Arwen glanced toward the waiting carriage, then back at him. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Rydian managed a quiet question. When did you stop hoping? A faint smile touched her lips. Not the relieved smile from the assembly. Not exactly. Something gentler, more reflective. I don't think it happened all at once. The honesty in her voice made it easier to listen and harder to hear. I think every unanswered question took a little piece of it. Rydian lowered his gaze, because he knew exactly what she meant. The uncertainty. The assumptions. The years spent leaving things unsaid. He had never promised her a future, but he had never given her an answer either. And eventually, uncertainty becomes its own answer. Arwen stepped toward the carriage. The movement felt small, yet final. Then she paused. One last time. Thank you. The word surprised him. For what? She smiled softly. For giving me clarity. The statement carried no bitterness, only truth. Then she climbed into the carriage. The driver gathered the reins. The horses began moving, slowly at first. Then steadily the crowd waved. Voices called farewell. And Rydian stood motionless as the distance between them grew. Years later, historians would remember his reign as successful. The kingdom prospered. Trade expanded. The borders remained secure. Yet there was one lesson the Alpha King never forgot. People fear rejection because they believe it destroys possibilities. What he learned was worse. Sometimes rejection doesn't destroy a possibility. It frees the other person from waiting. And once someone stops waiting, they start moving. By the time Rydian understood what Arwen's smile truly meant, she was already too far ahead to look back.